Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, and we will start with the Crimean front line. Once again, I would like to remind you that during the previous 4 days the Ukrainians destroyed bridges in this area. The Ukrainians destroyed or damaged the bridge to the south of the settlement of Changar, which is located along M18 road. We're talking about this territory, and this video was published by different sources yesterday, and here we can see the changes between the dates before and after the strike. And as you can see, according to these changes, the road bridge was damaged significantly. Later we received a report that the Ukrainians also attacked one of the bridges to the south of the settlement of Genichesk, and the local authorities were forced to reroute traffic from these areas further in the western direction towards the settlement by the name of Armyansk. But when talking about the territory around the settlement of Armyansk, there is a very interesting construction, and we are talking about the North Crimean Canal. So this is the North Crimean Canal that goes from the territory of Crimea further in the northern direction towards the river of Dnipro, more precisely towards the settlement by the name of Kakhovka. So this is approximately the northern Crimean Canal that the Russians used to supply and support Crimea with water. And this morning, on the 11th of June of 2026, we received the report that the Ukrainians attacked 2 more bridges in this area. The Ukrainians attacked the bridge to the north of the settlement of Armyansk. We are talking about this territory. So this bridge goes along this canal, and most likely the bridge was damaged as of the 11th of June of 2026. Per Russian sources didn't clarify the exact damage that the Ukrainians managed to deal to this construction. Furthermore, according to media, the Ukrainians also attacked the bridge between the settlements of Stavki and Preobrazhenka. So as you can see, 2 bridges along the North Crimean Canal were damaged by the Ukrainians. As of the morning of the 11th of June of 2026, the Russians still have a bridge in the area of the settlement of Mirne. So this one, the Russians can use this bridge for the logistic purposes, and the Russians can use the bridge to the north of the settlement of Kalanchak. But if something happens, let's say along the river of Dnipro, these 2 bridges are not enough for the armed forces of the Russian Federation to stabilize the situation. And the most important thing, we believe that the Ukrainians will continue attacking bridges along the Crimean Canal with the purpose to cut Crimea from supplying support from the mainland. And the most important, the Ukrainians will continue attacking the bridges in the northern parts of Crimea with the purpose to cut the southern Kherson region from Crimea and from the mainland. So this is the situation. Another important thing, as you can see, this western part of Kherson region, so this territory to the south of the city of Kherson, with the Kinburn Spit and with the settlements along the Black Sea like Lazurne, like Skadovsk, these territories are located to the west of this Crimean Canal. And if every single bridge along Crimean Canal is being destroyed, then the Russians will lose possibilities to supply and support their contingent along the river of Dnipro in the area of the city of Kherson. So we are talking about this territory. Of course, we are not talking that the Russians will lose complete possibilities to supply and support them. Obviously, and according to different sources, the Russians began constructions of pontoon bridges along this Crimean Canal, but pontoon bridges is not a very strong and reliable construction. Of course, the Russians can build these constructions, many of these constructions on the canal, but at the same time, the Ukrainians may also destroy them with the same pace as the Russians build them. And if it happens, we might say that not just Crimea would be cut from the mainland from supply and support, but also the western part of Kherson region, including the Kinburn Spit. And as we discussed during the previous days, during the previous videos, the Ukrainians since the beginning of June made at least 3 attempts to land infantry and to land marines on the territory of the western part of Kherson, but as of the morning of the 11th of June of 2026, all those attempts were repelled by the Russians, and the Ukrainians suffered huge losses. But it doesn't mean that the Ukrainians will not repeat these attempts in the future. And another important thing worth attention is that today, according to information we have, the Western ambassadors came to Russia. Ambassadors of Germany, France, and United Kingdom arrived at Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs to meet with Lavrov's deputy. The ambassadors are asking for a meeting to discuss recent certain comments made by their leaders, Merkel and Macron, which were deemed offensive to the Russian Federation. So, and most likely we believe that these ambassadors came to Moscow, came to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation with the purpose not to talk with the Russians, but to issue another ultimatum. Most likely this ultimatum would be issued behind the closed doors, but I believe that this ultimatum is obviously connected with the current situation in Crimea, in Kherson, Zaporozhye regions, and with the current situation with the Russian logistics and with the Russian oil refineries. And most likely this ultimatum will sound like following: either you accept the Western demands, or the European countries and Ukraine will strike and will increase the pressure, and maybe even we'll see something like a special operation carried out by the Ukrainians. But as I know Russians, as I understand Russians, most likely the Russians will listen to the European countries, and then the Russians will reject any ultimatum issued by the Western countries, and the conflict on the territory of Ukraine will continue. Meanwhile, both the Russians and the Ukrainians continue attacking each other with hundreds of drones. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine this morning reported that during the previous night, the Russians used 223 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine, and lots of explosions were recorded through the cities like Odessa, Poltava, Pavlograd, Kharkiv, Sumy, Konotop, and so on. Lots of explosions were recorded through the city of Odessa during the previous night, and the sources reported that the strikes by Iranian missiles and other weapons on ports in Odessa region have been recognized as extremely effective in terms of their impact on the Ukrainian economy. The strikes are targeting the most vulnerable and crucial link, seaborne grain export, leading to cascading losses for Ukraine's entire agricultural sector. Furthermore, the Russians continue attacking the settlement of Chernomorsk, and today we received additional updates on this matter and additional videos and videos where we can see changes between the dates before and after attack. As a result of attack, as you can see according to this video, several tanks were damaged and probably even destroyed in the area of the settlement of Chernomorsk. Furthermore, during the previous night, the Russians attacked the city of Pavlograd. As for the city of Pavlograd, the most important video is probably this one. Here we can see the main supply line and road that Ukrainians used to connect the mainland with the line of combat contact around the city of Pokrovsk, and here we can see how the Russians attacked this road with Iran drone, and most likely the Russians were attacking some military vehicles or logistics of the armed forces of Ukraine with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to use this road for supply and support purposes. Probably the most difficult area for Ukrainians these days is the city of Kharkiv, because the Russians probably have already launched thousands of drones in the direction of the city of Kharkiv since the beginning of this month. And during the previous night, once again, we received videos where we can see how exactly the Russians were attacking the territory of the Kharkiv region. Lots of fire anomalies were recorded through the night. And for example, in this video, we can see how the Russians managed to discover another factory that Ukrainians were using to produce drones. And when the Russians discovered this military object, the Russians attacked this territory immediately, and the results of attack, this object of military infrastructure was immediately destroyed. Furthermore, the Russians damaged several gas stations through the city of Kharkiv, and more videos on this matter were published during the previous night and this morning. Another important thing, the Russians continue attacking different objects of the territory of Kharkiv, parking sites, service centers, trucks and so on, or fuel trucks and so on, dealing significant damage to logistics, to supply and support of the armed forces of Ukraine, and to their military forces capabilities. Furthermore, the Russians attacked another object of gas infrastructure in the area of the settlement of Poltava. The sources reported that at least 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles probably targeted the Dikanka gas compressor station. And today I had a very interesting letter published and written to me by one of my subscribers, and he suggested and proposed a very interesting idea. That since the beginning of this year, the Russians just have destroyed probably thousands of trucks, maybe not thousands, but hundreds of trucks and probably dozens of gas stations. But despite these attacks, despite all these significant losses that the Russians managed to do to the Ukrainians, we see that the number of drones that the Ukrainians use to attack the theater of Russia is not reducing. For example, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians used more than 500 drones to attack the theater of Russia. For example, during the 10th of May, the Ukrainians used 203 drones, and for example, during the previous night, the Ukrainians used another 330 drones. So the numbers are still very high, despite the fact that the Russians, it seems that, have already reduced to complete ruins the entire eastern parts of Ukraine. So one of my subscribers wrote me a very interesting idea. He suggested that maybe the Ukrainians use the former gas pipelines for redeployment of drones in the direction of the line of combat contact. So, as you might know, when the conflict between Russia and Ukraine started, lots of huge gas pipelines were cut off by Ukrainians, and the Russians lost possibilities to export gas through the theater of Ukraine. Especially, lots of gas pipelines were cut through the eastern parts of Ukraine through this territory. And once again, some sources and some subscribers believe that maybe the Ukrainians managed to improve these gas pipelines with the purpose to deploy these drones as close as possible to the line of combat contact and to stay invisible for Russians during this transportation period of time. Maybe the video that the Ukrainians published several weeks ago of how they were attacking deep inside of the theater of Russia using trucks was a fake video, just with one purpose: to force the Russians to hunt and to seek these trucks and to destroy them, while the Ukrainians were using pipelines through the eastern parts of Ukraine to deploy these drones and to attack deep inside of the theater of Russia. So it's just speculation probably from my side, but this idea sounds very interesting probably. Now let's move further. And let's talk about the northern directions. During the previous nights, lots of explosions were recorded through the city of Sumy. Here we can see how a Russian drone fell on the theater of the railway station. Here we have the city of Konotop, and according to information we have, the Russians also attacked the theater around the railway station, and we can see a black smoke broke out right after the Russians attacked this territory, and we have videos from the settlement of Snov. So as you can see, despite the fact that the Russians continue attacking warehouses, ammo depots, gas stations, parking sites, trucks, concentration of truck service centers, we see that the Ukrainians continue using the same number of drones, and obviously this is a very big question for Russians: where exactly the Ukrainians are taking all these drones and how exactly the Ukrainians bring these drones to the line of combat contact. Now let's talk with the Ukrainian attack. As we discussed during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians used around 500 drones or even more to attack deep inside of the theater of Russia, and the biggest number of explosions and the drones were recorded through the southern regions around the settlement of Krasnodar. The sources reported that the Ukrainians attacked the Afinsky oil refinery. So this theater was attacked. Another oil refinery on the theater of the Russian Federation was hit by the Ukrainians, and as a result of attack, we see an explosion occurred right after, and we see that probably fire broke out right after the Ukrainians attacked this territory, which will maybe increase the oil crisis on the theater of Russia. And probably due to the fact that this Afinsky oil refinery was hit, the local population began buying oil and fuel through the theater of the city. Of course, the panic spread very fast through the city of Krasnodar, and vehicles and cars of civilians started buying fuel through the gas stations of the city, and of course, this can lead to economical crisis and to economical problems of the region and of the city of itself. So, as you can see, a small panic has started through the city city of Krasnodar right after the overnight attack. So this is the situation in this area, and this is the only settlement that was attacked by the Ukrainians, not that was attacked, but where the Ukrainians managed to at least hit something. The Ukrainians once again used more than 500 drones, and during the nights we haven't received anything else, just the city of Krasnodar and the oil refinery that was hit by the Ukrainians. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 12 hours, we received lots of very interesting changes. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their position through the Kostyantynivka direction, and this morning the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the armed force of the Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Roskoshne. As you can see, there is another village in this area, the village of Dovgaya Balka, but we haven't received anything on this matter, so that is why we believe that there is a pocket of resistance still on the territory of Dovgaya Balka, where the Ukrainians hold their positions through the western parts of the settlement. But according to this report, we see that the Russians managed to outflank main positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of Dovgaya Balka, which means that in coming days this settlement would be also captured by Russians, and we will adjust the map accordingly. Another important area is the northern direction. According to information we have, today the group of forces north finished the battle for the settlement of Grimovka. And based on the report published by the Minister of Defense and the group of forces north, we have adjusted the map. So this is the situation by the end of the 10th of June, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 11th of June of 2026. The Russians, as a result of clashes, established complete control over the territory, and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back further in the direction of Zakharovka. Now the Russians most likely will continue offensive operation further towards the village of Mala Vovcha. The group of forces north haven't reported anything about the beginning of the battle for this territory. According to the group of forces north, there are clashes for the settlement of Nisterna in this direction, which means that in coming days we may receive additional report about the situation in this area as well. So as we can see, the Russians most likely within the next 2 weeks most likely will finish the battle for the foothold along the river of Volcha. And that's it for the short video. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.